You know that feeling when you're lying awake at 3 in the morning, your mind spinning like a broken record, going over everything you should have said, could have done, might still fix tomorrow? There you are, the great controller of your destiny, completely out of control. But what if I told you that this very struggle, this exhausting effort to manage every detail of your existence, is precisely what's keeping you from the life you actually want? What if your tight grip on the steering wheel is exactly why you keep crashing? I've spent decades watching people tie themselves into impossible knots, trying to force life into neat little boxes. And here's the delicious irony. The moment they stop trying so hard, everything starts working. Not because life suddenly becomes easier, but because they finally learn how to dance with it instead of wrestling it to the ground. Now, let me tell you about this fascinating creature we call the human being. Somewhere along the way, we developed the most peculiar notion that we were supposed to be in charge of this whole cosmic circus. Not just our little corner of it, oh no, that would be far too modest. We decided we should control our thoughts, our feelings, other people's reactions, the weather, the economy, and while we're at it, why not manage time itself? It's really quite extraordinary when you think about it. Here we are, these temporary arrangements of stardust, convinced we can micromanage infinity. We wake up each morning with our little lists and plans, ready to impose our will upon the universe. And when things don't go according to our magnificent schemes, we don't question the scheme, we simply try harder. But I want you to consider something rather revolutionary. What if this whole obsession with control isn't actually about control at all? What if it's really about fear? Fear of uncertainty, fear of not being enough, fear of discovering that maybe, just maybe, we don't need to be the manager of existence after all. You see, the addiction to control is really the ego's desperate attempt to feel safe in an inherently unsafe world. But safety was never the point, was it? Life isn't safe, it's alive. And the moment you truly understand this distinction, something remarkable begins to happen. Watch a cat stalking a bird. The cat isn't trying to control the bird, it's responding moment by moment to what the bird does. There's no plan, no strategy, just pure intelligent responsiveness. And when the bird flies away, the cat doesn't file a complaint with the universe. It simply finds something else to be interested in. But we humans, we've convinced ourselves that we should be able to predict and control outcomes. We think that if we just plan enough, worry enough, try hard enough, we can guarantee results. What an exhausting way to live, and what a perfect setup for perpetual disappointment. The truth is, this obsession with control is actually making us less effective, not more. When you're gripping life too tightly, you miss the subtle signals that could guide you toward what you actually want. You become so focused on forcing your predetermined plan that you miss the better opportunities life is trying to offer you. I remember years ago trying to force my way through a difficult conversation with someone. I had my points all mapped out, my arguments perfectly planned, but the harder I pushed, the more they resisted. Finally, I gave up trying to convince them and simply listened. And in that moment of surrender, something magical happened. The conversation transformed completely, and we found understanding I never could have planned. This is what happens when you stop trying to control life and start dancing with it instead. Problems don't disappear, but they transform from enemies into teachers. Resistance becomes information rather than frustration. And you begin to discover that life has its own intelligence, one far more vast and creative than your individual will could ever be. But here's the delicious paradox. The moment you stop trying to control everything, you actually become far more influential. Not because you're forcing outcomes, but because you're finally working with life's natural flow rather than against it. You become like water, soft, flexible, yielding, and yet capable of carving through solid rock. So what would happen if you conducted an experiment? What if, just for today, you approached your challenges not as problems to solve, but as dances to learn? What if you treated your plans as suggestions rather than commandments? You might discover that the universe is far more cooperative when you stop trying to boss it around. Now, let's talk about this character you call myself, this ego that's convinced it's running the show. What a masterpiece of self-deception. Here's this tiny fragment of consciousness, floating in an infinite ocean of existence, absolutely convinced it's the captain of the ship. But watch closely how this illusion operates. The ego takes credit for everything good that happens and feels guilty about everything bad. It believes your thoughts are yours, your feelings are yours, your successes and failures are all products of this separate self that supposedly exists independent of everything else. What delicious nonsense! Did you create your own heartbeat this morning? Did you consciously decide to grow your hair, digest your breakfast, or circulate your blood? Of course not. The most essential functions of your life are happening without any input from this so-called controller. And yet, when it comes to emotions, relationships, and life circumstances, suddenly this ego believes it should be omnipotent. It's like a passenger on a train insisting they're driving, getting increasingly frustrated when the train doesn't follow their preferred route. Meanwhile, the train continues on its perfectly intelligent journey, following tracks laid down by forces far more vast and wise than any individual will. But here's where it gets really interesting. The ego's greatest trick isn't convincing you that you're in control, it's convincing you that you should be in control. That if you're not managing every detail, you're somehow failing at life. What a magnificent setup for perpetual anxiety. I want you to try something right now. Can you control your next thought? Really try it. Decide exactly what you're going to think next and then think it. What happened? If you're honest, you'll notice that thoughts simply arise in consciousness like bubbles rising to the surface of a pond. You don't manufacture them any more than you manufacture the weather. The same is true for emotions. They arise, they peak, they fade away, all without any central command from the ego. Yet we spend so much energy trying to control our emotional state, forcing ourselves to feel what we think we should feel, rather than simply allowing what is to be what it is. This creates enormous internal conflict. Part of you feels sad, but the ego says you shouldn't be sad. Part of you feels angry, but the ego says anger is bad. Part of you wants to rest, but the ego says you should be productive. And so you end up fighting yourself, creating an exhausting internal war between what is and what the ego thinks should be. But what if you simply stopped fighting? What if you allowed sadness to be sad, anger to be angry, tiredness to be tired, without making any of it a problem that needs to be solved? What if you treated emotions like weather, sometimes sunny, sometimes stormy, but always changing and never requiring your management? This doesn't mean becoming a victim of your emotions. It means recognizing that emotions are information, not instructions. They tell you something about your current state, but they don't have to dictate your actions. You can feel angry without acting angry. You can feel afraid without being paralyzed by fear. You can feel sad without making sadness into a problem. The ego desperately wants to maintain the illusion that it's the center of the universe. But here's the beautiful secret. You are the universe, not the ego that's just a temporary costume consciousness is wearing. The real you is the awareness in which all experiences arise and pass away. And that awareness doesn't need to control anything because it is everything. When you begin to identify with this larger self rather than the small self, something miraculous happens. The need to control starts to dissolve naturally. Not because you've learned a technique, but because you've remembered your true nature. You realize you're not a separate wave trying to control the ocean. You are the ocean, temporarily experiencing itself as a wave. And from this perspective, the question of control becomes absurd. How can you control what you are? How can the ocean be separate from its own waves? This recognition doesn't make you passive, it makes you spontaneous, free to respond authentically to whatever arises, without the interference of this anxious little manager called the ego. You know what's absolutely fascinating about this whole control business? Watch someone trying really hard to relax. There they are, gripping their meditation cushion with white knuckles, forcing themselves to breathe deeply, commanding their minds to be peaceful. Be present, they shout at themselves. Stop thinking. It's like trying to smooth water with your hand. The more you try, the more turbulent it becomes. And this, my friends, is the exhausting theater we perform daily. We wake up and immediately begin our elaborate performance of being in charge. We muscle our way through conversations, trying to control how others perceive us. We force ourselves through emotions we don't want to feel, pushing away experiences we've decided are negative. We plan and scheme and worry and manipulate, all in service of this grand illusion that we're the directors of this cosmic drama. But have you ever noticed what happens when you're completely absorbed in something? When you're dancing and lose yourself in the music, or painting and forget there's a you holding the brush? Suddenly, everything flows. The dancer disappears into the dance, the painter into the painting. There's no effort, no strain, no controller trying to control. There's just pure, effortless action. This is what the Chinese call Wu Wei, actionless, action, effort without strain. It's not laziness or passivity. It's intelligence in motion, responding perfectly to what the moment requires, without the interference of this anxious little manager we call the ego. But our culture has taught us to be suspicious of effortlessness. We've been conditioned to believe that if something isn't difficult, it doesn't count. No pain, no gain. We say, completely missing the point, that the most profound transformations happen when we stop forcing and start flowing. I remember watching a master calligrapher at work once. His brush moved across the rice paper with such grace, such apparent ease, that it looked like the characters were writing themselves. When I asked him about his technique, he laughed. "There is no technique," he said. "There is only the brush, the ink, and this moment. When I try to make beautiful characters, they become ugly. When I forget myself and let the beauty happen, it flows naturally." This is the secret that effort-obsessed minds find so difficult to accept. The most beautiful expressions of human creativity happen not through forcing, but through getting out of the way. The most effective actions arise not from struggle, but from alignment with natural intelligence. Think about how you learned to walk. Did you study manuals on ambulation? Did you analyze the biomechanics of balance and locomotion? Of course not. You fell down, you got up, you tried again. You played with movement until walking became as natural as breathing. There was effort involved, yes, but it was effortless, effort the kind that emerges from joy rather than strain. But somewhere along the way, we lost this natural wisdom. We started believing that everything worthwhile must be difficult, that we have to earn our place in existence through struggle. We turned life into a test we're constantly trying to pass rather than a gift we're free to enjoy. And so we exhaust ourselves trying to force outcomes, trying to make things happen through sheer will. We grip our relationships so tightly that we squeeze the life out of them. We pursue our goals with such intensity that we miss the joy of the journey. We work so hard at being successful that we forget what success actually feels like. Here's what I've discovered after decades of watching this human comedy. The things that matter most in life cannot be forced. Love cannot be manufactured through effort. Joy cannot be commanded into existence. Peace cannot be wrestled into submission. Wisdom cannot be accumulated like possessions. These gifts arise naturally when we create the right conditions, when we stop trying so hard and start being present to what's already here. This doesn't mean becoming passive or lazy. It means learning to distinguish between intelligent action and compulsive doing, between responding to what life asks of you and forcing your agenda on life, between working with the grain of existence and working against it. When you stop performing this exhausting theater of effort, something beautiful happens. Energy that was trapped in the struggle becomes available for creativity. Attention that was consumed by the effort to control becomes free to notice what's actually happening, and you discover that life has been trying to support you all along. You were just too busy fighting it to notice. Let me share with you one of nature's most profound teachers, water. Have you ever really watched water move? It doesn't struggle against obstacles, it embraces them. When water encounters a rock, it doesn't try to move the rock, it simply finds another way. And in finding another way, it gradually, gently, inevitably shapes the rock itself. Water is never in a hurry, yet it always reaches the sea. It doesn't resist gravity, it cooperates with it completely. It doesn't fight the landscape, it reveals the landscape's hidden intelligence by following its natural contours. And in doing so, it nourishes everything it touches. Now, contrast this with how most of us approach our lives. We encounter an obstacle and immediately begin pushing against it. We resist what's happening, fight against circumstances, struggle to make reality conform to our preferences, and we wonder why we're exhausted, why life feels like such a battle, why things seem to get harder the more effort we apply. But what if you could learn to move like water? What if, instead of seeing obstacles as problems to overcome, you saw them as information about which way to flow? What if resistance became your teacher rather than your enemy? I remember sitting by a stream once, watching water navigate around stones, and suddenly understanding something profound. The water wasn't avoiding the stones, it was dancing with them. Every rock became part of the water's song, creating ripples and eddies that made the flow more beautiful, not less. The obstacles weren't interfering with the water's journey, they were collaborating in its expression. This is what happens when you stop trying to control life and start learning to dance with it. Problems don't disappear, but they transform from enemies into dance partners. Challenges become opportunities for creativity rather than evidence of failure. And you begin to discover that life has its own intelligence, its own perfect timing, its own way of working out exactly as it needs to. Water also teaches us about the power of softness. It's the softest substance on earth, yielding to the slightest pressure. You can't punch water or attack it, your fist simply passes through it. Yet this soft, yielding substance carves through solid rock, creates magnificent canyons, shapes entire continents. How? Through persistent, gentle pressure combined with perfect timing. There's enormous wisdom in this for how we approach our own challenges. When we encounter resistance in our relationships, our work, our personal growth, our first instinct is usually to push harder. But what if we responded like water instead? What if we became softer, more yielding, more patient? Not passive water is never passive, but intelligently responsive to what each moment requires. I knew a woman once who was having terrible conflicts with her teenage daughter. The more she tried to control her daughter's behavior, the more rebellious the girl became. Finally, exhausted by the constant battles, she decided to try a different approach. Instead of fighting her daughter's resistance, she began flowing around it. She listened more and lectured less. She became curious about her daughter's world instead of constantly trying to change it. And something beautiful happened. As she became softer, her daughter's defenses began to relax. The girl started opening up, sharing her struggles, asking for guidance instead of rejecting it. The mother's water-like approach didn't eliminate all their challenges, but it transformed their relationship from a battlefield into a space of mutual respect and growing understanding. Water also shows us the beauty of following natural laws rather than fighting them. It doesn't try to flow uphill that would be exhausting and futile. It works with gravity, with the natural slope of things, finding the path of least resistance that still leads where it needs to go. In your own life, what would it mean to work with the natural slope of things? Instead of forcing your way up impossible mountains, what if you looked for the natural flow patterns in your situation? What if you trusted that life, like water, has its own intelligence about which way to move? This doesn't mean being weak or giving up on your dreams. It means recognizing that there's usually an easier way than the one you're forcing yourself through, a way that works with natural forces rather than against them, a way that allows you to arrive where you're going without exhausting yourself in the process. The Tao Te Ching says, "Nothing in the world is softer than water, yet nothing is better at overcoming the hard and strong." This is the paradox that our force-oriented minds find so difficult to grasp. True power isn't about being harder than what opposes you, it's about being softer, more flexible, more willing to adapt and flow. When you begin to embody this water-like quality in your daily life, everything changes. Conversations become more fluid and authentic. Challenges become opportunities for creative response. And you discover that the universe is far more supportive than you ever imagined, not because it's giving you what you want, but because you've learned to want what it's naturally offering. You want to see what effortless living looks like? Watch a 3-year-old. Not when they're having a tantrum. Of course, that's just learned behavior. Watch them when they're completely absorbed in play, building castles in the sand, chasing butterflies, lost in the imaginary worlds they create with nothing but sticks and stones. There's no self-consciousness there, no second-guessing, no anxiety about whether they're doing it right. They're not trying to build the perfect sandcastle. They're simply building, enjoying every grain of sand, every moment of creation. When the wave comes and washes it away, they don't file a complaint with the universe. They laugh and start building another one. Children haven't yet learned that they're supposed to be in control of outcomes. They haven't been taught to worry about the future or regret the past. They exist in this magical space where action and being are the same thing. They don't play in order to achieve something. They play for the sheer joy of playing. But then we grow up, and gradually this natural wisdom gets educated right out of us. We learn to be goal-oriented, outcome-focused, result-driven. We start measuring our worth by our achievements rather than our aliveness. We forget that the point of life isn't to win some cosmic game, it's to play it with as much joy and creativity and presence as possible. And here's the beautiful irony. When you rediscover this childlike approach to living, when you stop trying to control outcomes and start enjoying processes, life begins to work better than ever. Not because you're trying to make it work, but because you're finally allowing it to work through you. I'm not suggesting we become childish, that would be regression. I'm suggesting we become childlike, that's wisdom. The difference is that a child doesn't know they're not in control, while a wise adult knows they never were and finds this liberating rather than terrifying. Watch how a child approaches a new experience. There's no lengthy analysis, no careful planning, no worry about potential problems. They simply dive in with curiosity and enthusiasm. They're willing to look foolish, to make mistakes, to try things that might not work. And in this willingness to be beginners, they learn faster than any adult who's trying to maintain their image of competence. I remember watching my neighbor's daughter learn to ride a bicycle. She fell down dozens of times, got back up laughing, and tried again. She wasn't concerned about whether she looked graceful or skilled. She was completely absorbed in the joy of figuring it out. And because she wasn't afraid of falling, she wasn't tense, which made balancing easier. Her willingness to fail actually accelerated her success. Now contrast this with how most adults approach new challenges. We want guarantees. Before we begin, we analyze all the possible ways things could go wrong. We are so concerned about looking foolish that we avoid anything where we might not immediately excel. And in trying to protect ourselves from failure, we often protect ourselves right out of success. Children also demonstrate the art of spontaneous response. They don't carry elaborate scripts about how interactions should go. They respond authentically to what's actually happening, rather than what they think should be happening. If they feel sad, they cry. If they feel joyful, they dance. If they're curious, they ask questions. There's no internal committee debating whether their response is appropriate. This spontaneity isn't reckless, it's intelligent. It's the intelligence of life responding to life without the interference of overthinking. Children are constantly in dialogue with their environment, adjusting their approach based on immediate feedback rather than predetermined plans. But perhaps the most profound teaching children offer is their relationship to the present moment. They don't live in the past or the future, they live right here, right now. When they're eating an ice cream cone, they're completely absorbed in the experience of eating ice cream. When they're playing with a toy, that toy becomes the most important thing in the universe. When they're listening to a story, they're transported completely into that imaginary world. This quality of presence is what we're all secretly longing for. The ability to be fully here, fully alive, fully engaged with whatever we're doing. But we've trained ourselves out of this natural capacity through our obsession with control and planning and managing outcomes. Children also show us what it means to live without the burden of being someone special. They don't wake up thinking, how can I maintain my image today? They don't filter their experiences through the question, what will people think of me? They simply are who they are in each moment, without apology or pretense. And yet, paradoxically, this makes them utterly captivating. Their authenticity draws us in. Their spontaneity delights us. Their presence awakens our own dormant aliveness. They're not trying to be special, but their naturalness makes them magical. What would happen if you gave yourself permission to approach your life with this same childlike wonder? What if you became curious about your challenges rather than overwhelmed by them? What if you allowed yourself to play with solutions rather than forcing them? What if you trusted your natural responsiveness rather than trying to script every interaction? You don't need to learn how to be childlike, that wisdom is still alive in you. You just need to stop interfering with it through your attempts to be a mature, responsible, controlling adult. The child in you knows exactly how to live. The question is, are you willing to let them teach you? Now here's where things get deliciously complicated. Because the moment I tell you to let go, what does your mind immediately do? It starts trying to let go. It makes letting go into another project, another goal to achieve, another way to be in control. Okay, says the ego. I'll be the best let-go you've ever seen. I'll surrender so hard, I'll be more surrendered than anyone. Do you see the magnificent absurdity here? Trying to let go is still trying. Forcing yourself to surrender is still forcing. Making non-control into a technique is just control wearing a spiritual costume. It's like trying to fall asleep by commanding yourself to sleep. The harder you try, the more awake you become. This is why so many spiritual seekers get themselves tied up in knots. They read about letting go, about surrender, about trusting the universe. And immediately their controlling minds say, excellent, another strategy, another way to get what I want. But letting go can't be done, it can only be allowed to happen. Real letting go is more like, well, have you ever been carrying something heavy and suddenly realized you could just put it down? There's no technique to putting down a heavy suitcase, you simply stop holding it. You don't have to learn how to not grip, you just recognize that gripping is optional. The beautiful secret is that you're already doing this, constantly. Right now, you're letting go of thousands of things without even thinking about it. You're letting your heart beat without managing each beat. You're allowing your breath to breathe you without micromanaging your lungs. You're trusting your body to digest your food, your eyes to see, your ears to hear, all without conscious control. So the question isn't how to let go, you already know how. Question is, what would happen if you applied this same natural wisdom to your thoughts, your emotions, your relationships, your entire life? What if you trusted the intelligence that's already running your body to also guide your destiny? I remember a student once asking me, how do I learn to trust? And I had to laugh, not at the question, but at the assumption behind it. Trust isn't something you learn, it's something you already are. You're trusting gravity right now to keep you from floating away. You're trusting the earth to continue spinning. You're trusting your body to function without your supervision. The only question is whether you'll extend this trust to include the larger movements of your life. Whether you'll trust that the same intelligence that grows your fingernails and beats your heart might also know something about how to navigate your challenges and fulfill your deepest desires. But here's the trap that catches so many people. They think letting go means becoming passive, giving up their ability to respond and act. They imagine surrender as a kind of spiritual suicide, where you just lie down and let life walk all over you. Nothing could be further from the truth. Real letting go makes you more responsive, not less. When you're not wasting energy trying to control the uncontrollable, that energy becomes available for intelligent action. When you're not caught up in forcing predetermined outcomes, you become sensitive to opportunities you never would have noticed before. It's like the difference between a skilled martial artist and someone who's just flailing around. The skilled fighter isn't trying to control their opponent, they're responding fluidly to whatever the opponent does, using the opponent's own energy and momentum. They're relaxed but alert, soft but precise, yielding but incredibly effective. This is what letting go actually looks like in practice. Not passivity, but responsive aliveness. Not giving up, but giving in to a deeper wisdom than your personal will. Not becoming a doormat, but becoming so fluid that resistance moves through you rather than getting stuck in you. The paradox goes even deeper than this. The things you're trying so hard to control, your reputation, your security, your future, become more naturally available when you stop grasping for them. It's like trying to catch your own shadow. The more you chase it, the more it runs away from you. But turn toward the light, and the shadow follows naturally. I've watched people spend decades trying to force love into their lives, only to discover that love appears naturally when they stop being so desperate for it. I've seen others exhaust themselves pursuing success, only to find that success comes effortlessly when they focus on being genuinely useful rather than being important. This isn't because the universe is playing games with us. It's because the very energy of grasping repels what we're grasping for. Desperation creates desperation, anxiety attracts anxiety, but relaxed confidence in life's intelligence creates space for miracles to unfold naturally. So how do you let go without trying to let go? You begin by noticing what you're holding on to, not to judge it or fix it, but simply to become aware of where you're gripping life too tightly. And then you experiment with relaxing that grip, not all at once, but gradually, gently, like loosening a clenched fist. Sometimes the very recognition that you're holding on is enough for the holding to soften. Sometimes you need to ask yourself, what am I afraid will happen if I don't control this? And then, what if that happened and I found a way to respond beautifully to it? Often you discover that what you're trying to prevent isn't actually as terrible as your imagination makes it seem. You know what's really amusing about certainty? We crave it desperately, yet the only thing we can be certain of is uncertainty. Tomorrow is a complete mystery. Next week is unknown territory. Even the next moment is utterly unpredictable. And yet we spend enormous amounts of energy trying to make the unknowable known, trying to control the uncontrollable. But here's what I've discovered in my years of watching people wrestle with life. Those who dance most gracefully with uncertainty aren't the ones who have more control. They're the ones who've learned to find excitement in not knowing what comes next. They've discovered that uncertainty isn't the enemy of peace, it's the source of all possibility. Think about it this way. If you knew exactly what was going to happen in your life, if every moment was predictable and planned, would that be living or would that be sleepwalking through existence? The very word adventure implies not knowing how things will turn out. Without uncertainty, there can be no surprise, no discovery, no growth, no real joy. I remember years ago getting completely lost while hiking in the mountains. At first, my mind went into complete panic mode. Where am I? How do I get back? What if I can't find my way? But after a while, something shifted. I began to notice the extraordinary beauty of not knowing where I was going. Every turn revealed something unexpected. Every step was an exploration rather than a predetermined march toward a goal. And then I realized this is how life actually is, all the time. We're all wandering through existence without a map, making it up as we go along. The only difference is whether we fight this reality or embrace it, whether we see being lost as a problem or as the most natural state of being alive. When you stop demanding that life be predictable, something magical happens. You become available to what life actually wants to offer you, rather than being stuck on what you think it should offer. You start responding to what's actually happening rather than what you wish were happening. And paradoxically, this makes you far more effective, not less. Because now you're dancing with reality rather than wrestling with your fantasies about reality. And reality, it turns out, is a much better dance partner than your imagination ever was. But our culture has trained us to fear uncertainty. We are taught from childhood that not knowing is dangerous, that we should have our lives figured out, that uncertainty equals failure. We spend fortunes on insurance policies, security systems, retirement plans, all in a desperate attempt to make the uncertain certain. And while some practical planning is certainly wise, the problem arises when we become so addicted to the illusion of security that we miss the aliveness that's only available in the unknown. When we become so focused on protecting ourselves from possible futures that we forget to fully show up for the present moment. Consider how creativity actually works. Have you ever sat down to write a poem or paint a picture with the final result completely planned in advance? If you have, you probably discovered that the result felt lifeless, mechanical, predictable. The most alive creative expressions emerge from not knowing, from allowing something unexpected to emerge through the process itself. The same is true for conversations, for relationships, for problem solving, for living itself. When you approach these activities with fixed ideas about how they should unfold, You miss the magic that wants to happen naturally. But when you enter them with genuine openness to what might emerge, extraordinary things become possible. I know a jazz musician who explained this beautifully. He said that the most powerful moments in improvisation come when he stops trying to play the right notes and starts listening so deeply to what's happening musically that the music begins to play him. He becomes a conduit for something larger than his personal will or knowledge. This is what it means to dance with uncertainty, to become so present and responsive that you're guided by the intelligence of the situation itself, rather than your preconceptions about what should happen. It's not recklessness, it's a kind of supreme confidence. Confidence not in your ability to control outcomes, but in your ability to respond wisely to whatever arises. The ancient Chinese had a beautiful concept called beginner's mind. It's the wisdom of approaching each situation as if you're encountering it for the first time, regardless of how much experience you have. This beginner's mind is naturally comfortable with not knowing because it's excited about discovering. When you cultivate this quality of freshness, you start to see uncertainty not as a problem to be solved, but as a doorway to be walked through. Each unknown situation becomes an opportunity to discover new capacities in yourself. Each challenge becomes a chance to practice responding from wisdom rather than reacting from fear. But perhaps the most profound shift happens when you realize that you yourself are a mystery. You don't actually know what you're truly capable of until you're tested. You don't know how you'll respond to unprecedented situations until they arise. You don't know what depths of love, courage, creativity, and wisdom live within you until circumstances call them forth. This unknown quality of your own being is not something to be afraid of. It's the source of all transformation and growth. It means you're not limited to the patterns of your past or the definitions of your personality. It means that in each moment you have the possibility of surprising yourself, of discovering new ways of being you never knew were possible. So what would happen if, instead of trying to make your life predictable, you made it an adventure? What if you approached each day with curiosity about what might emerge, rather than anxiety about what might go wrong? What if you treated uncertainty as your friend rather than your enemy? You might discover that the very thing you've been running from the unknown is actually where your greatest gifts are hiding, waiting for you to be brave enough to dance with them. Now, I want to be very careful here because I don't want you to think I'm advocating passivity or fatalism. There's a world of difference between giving up control and becoming responsive to what life is actually asking of you. One is collapse, the other is intelligence in action. When I say stop trying to control, I'm not suggesting you become a limp rag floating wherever the wind blows. I'm talking about learning to distinguish between response and reaction, between intelligent action and compulsive doing, between moving with life's intelligence and fighting against it. Here's a simple way to understand the difference. When you react, you're being controlled by circumstances. Something happens, and automatically, without conscious choice, you respond in a predetermined pattern. Someone criticizes you, and immediately you defend yourself. Something doesn't go according to plan, and instantly you're stressed or angry or frustrated. But when you respond rather than react, there's space between the stimulus and your action. Something happens, and instead of immediately launching into your habitual pattern, you pause. You take a breath. You sense into what the situation is actually calling for rather than what your conditioning tells you to do. This pause, this moment of conscious awareness, is where real freedom lives. Not freedom from circumstances, but freedom in relationship to circumstances. The ability to choose your response rather than being triggered into automatic patterns. A skilled sailor doesn't control the wind. That would be impossible. But they read the wind, feel into its patterns, and adjust their sails accordingly. They work with the forces of nature rather than against them. And in doing so, they can travel vast distances using energy they didn't have to create themselves. This is what intelligent response looks like in human life. You stop trying to control the winds of circumstance and start learning to adjust your sails. You become exquisitely sensitive to the subtle currents of each situation, reading what wants to happen rather than forcing what you think should happen. I remember watching a master chef at work once. What struck me wasn't his technical skill, impressive as that was, but his quality of attention. He tasted constantly adjusting seasonings based on what each dish was telling him it needed. He didn't follow recipes blindly. He entered into a dialogue with the ingredients, with the cooking process itself. The meal that emerged was far more delicious than anything he could have planned in advance. This is the art of intelligent response, entering into genuine dialogue with life, rather than trying to impose your agenda on it. Listening so deeply to what each moment requires that your actions arise naturally from that understanding. Like the chef tasting and adjusting, you develop the capacity to sense what your situation needs and respond accordingly. But this requires a fundamental shift in how you relate to problems and challenges. Instead of seeing them as obstacles to overcome, you begin to see them as information to respond to. Instead of asking, how do I get rid of this? You start asking, what is this trying to teach me? Instead of immediately jumping to solutions, you spend time really understanding what you're dealing with. It's like the difference between a doctor who prescribes the same treatment for everyone with similar symptoms and a doctor who takes time to understand each patient's unique constitution and circumstances. The first approach might work sometimes, but the second approach is far more likely to result in genuine healing. In your relationships, intelligent response means listening for what the other person actually needs rather than what you think they should need. It means being willing to be surprised by people rather than relating to your fixed ideas about who they are. It means responding to what's happening now rather than what happened yesterday or what you fear might happen tomorrow. In your work, it means staying flexible and creative rather than rigidly following predetermined plans when circumstances change. It means being willing to admit when your initial approach isn't working and adjusting course accordingly. It means trusting your capacity to respond wisely to whatever emerges, rather than needing to have everything figured out in advance. This kind of responsiveness isn't something you have to learn from scratch. You already possess it. Watch how you naturally adjust your walking when the terrain changes. Notice how you automatically moderate your voice when you enter a quiet room. Observe how you intuitively know when someone needs comfort versus when they need space. Your body and your natural intelligence are constantly making intelligent responses without conscious effort. The art is extending this natural wisdom to areas of your life where your mind has convinced you that you need to be in control. What would happen if you trusted this responsive intelligence more? What if, instead of trying to figure everything out mentally, you allowed your whole being, body, emotions, intuition, mind, to participate in sensing what each situation requires? You might discover that you know far more about how to live than you've been giving yourself credit for. Here's something that might shock you. In a world obsessed with control, trust is the most revolutionary act you can commit. Not blind trust, that's just naivety wearing a spiritual costume. I'm talking about intelligent trust. Trust based on a deep understanding of how life actually works, rather than how you think it should work. But what does it mean to trust life? It doesn't mean believing that everything that happens is good in some simplistic sense. Bad things happen to good people. Unfair circumstances arise. Plans fail. Dreams get shattered. Trust doesn't deny these realities, it transforms your relationship to them. Real trust is faith in life's fundamental intelligence, even when you can't see the pattern from your limited perspective. It's recognizing that the same intelligence that grows flowers from seeds and heals cuts without your conscious intervention is also at work in the larger movements of your existence. This doesn't make you passive or resigned. A gardener trusts the intelligence of seeds to sprout and grow, but they still plant them in good soil, water them, and tend to them carefully. Trust and intelligent action aren't opposites, they're dance partners. I want you to consider something radical. What if your deepest problems aren't actually problems, but invitations? Invitations to discover capacities in yourself you never knew existed. Invitations to let go of patterns that no longer serve you. Invitations to trust life at a deeper level than you've ever trusted before. I'm not suggesting you should be grateful for suffering that would be perverse, but I am suggesting that suffering often catalyzes growth in ways that comfort never could. The muscle that's never challenged never grows stronger. The capacity that's never tested never develops. Sometimes life presents us with difficulties precisely because we're ready for the growth they make possible. This is a very different way of relating to challenges than our culture typically teaches. Instead of seeing yourself as a victim of circumstances, you begin to see yourself as being trusted by life with experiences that can deepen your wisdom, compassion, and resilience. But trust also requires a kind of cosmic humility, the recognition that your individual perspective, however intelligent and well-informed, is necessarily limited. You can see your immediate circumstances clearly, but you can't see how they fit into the larger pattern of your entire life. You can understand your current chapter, but you don't know how the story ends. This humility isn't self-deprecation, it's realism. It's acknowledging that life operates on scales of time and complexity that dwarf individual understanding. Your job isn't to figure out the entire cosmic plan, it's to respond wisely to what's in front of you right now. I knew a woman who spent years fighting against her financial circumstances, exhausting herself, trying to force abundance through sheer willpower. Finally, she reached a point of such exhaustion that she simply surrendered, not giving up, but giving in to a deeper trust. She started paying attention to what wanted to emerge in her life rather than forcing what she thought should emerge. And something beautiful happened. She discovered a natural talent for helping people organize their lives, something she'd never considered as a career. By trusting what was naturally arising rather than forcing what she thought should arise, she found both financial stability and deep fulfillment. The very thing she'd been trying so hard to create came naturally when she stopped forcing it. This is what trust looks like in practice, not passive waiting, but active attunement to what wants to happen. Learning to distinguish between your ego's agenda and life's deeper intelligence. Following the energy rather than the plan. Moving toward what feels alive rather than what looks safe. But trust also means accepting that you don't get to be in control of outcomes. You can plant seeds, but you can't control exactly how they grow. You can do your best work, but you can't control how others respond to it. You can love fully, but you can't control whether that love is returned. For most people, this feels terrifying at first. We've been conditioned to believe that if we're not controlling outcomes, we're being irresponsible. But what if the opposite is true? What if trying to control outcomes is actually irresponsible because it prevents you from responding intelligently to what's actually happening? Think about it this way. When you're completely focused on forcing a predetermined outcome, you miss information that could guide you towards something even better. When you're gripping tightly to your plan, you can't adapt when circumstances change. When you're trying to control other people's responses, you can't hear what they're actually trying to communicate. Trust liberates you from this tunnel vision. It allows you to remain open and responsive rather than rigidly attached to specific outcomes. This doesn't make you less effective, it makes you more effective because you're working with reality rather than against it. The deepest level of trust is trusting your own capacity to respond beautifully to whatever life presents. Not knowing ahead of time how you'll handle future challenges, but trusting that when they arise, you'll find a way. Not needing guarantees about how things will work out, but trusting your ability to work beautifully with however they do work out. This trust in your own responsiveness is perhaps the most practical form of faith. It's based on evidence you've been responding to challenges your entire life. You've survived everything that's happened to you so far. You've learned and grown and adapted again and again. Why would this suddenly stop being true? When you trust in this way, life stops being a test you might fail and becomes an adventure you're capable of navigating. Not because you know where you're going, but because you trust your capacity to respond wisely to wherever you find yourself. And now we arrive at the most paradoxical destination of all, the freedom that emerges when you finally stop trying to be free. Because, you see, most of our struggles for freedom are actually sophisticated forms of bondage. We fight to be free from circumstances, free from other people's opinions, free from uncertainty, free from discomfort. But this kind of freedom-seeking is just another way of being controlled by our aversion to what is. Real freedom isn't freedom from life, it's freedom in life. It's the recognition that you are not separate from the flow of existence, trying to manage it from the outside. You are the flow itself, temporarily experiencing itself as a wave that thinks it's separate from the ocean. When this recognition dawns not as a concept but as a lived reality, everything changes. The exhausting project of trying to control life reveals itself as a cosmic joke. It's like a fish frantically swimming around looking for water, not realizing it's already completely immersed in the very thing it seeks. But what does this freedom actually look like in daily life? It doesn't mean you become a spiritual zombie, detached from outcomes and desires. It means you pursue what calls to you without being enslaved by the results. You care deeply without being imprisoned by your caring. You engage fully without losing yourself in the engagement. I remember meeting an old jazz pianist who embodied this perfectly. He would sit down at the piano and play with such joy, such presence, such complete involvement that the music seemed to play itself through him. When I asked him about technique and practice, he smiled. "I practiced for 40 years to forget everything I learned," he said. "Now the music plays me." This is what freedom looks like, not the absence of structure or discipline, but such deep integration with natural flow that effort becomes effortless. Not the elimination of choice, but choices that arise so naturally from your authentic being that they don't feel like choices at all. In this state, problems don't disappear, but your relationship to them transforms completely. Instead of seeing problems as evidence that something is wrong with your life, you see them as the texture of aliveness itself. Mountains and valleys, storms and sunshine, all part of the magnificent weather of existence. You stop dividing your experiences into good and bad and start experiencing them as interesting and more interesting. Everything becomes workable material for the art of living. Challenges become opportunities for creativity. Mistakes become unexpected teachers. Even failures become doorways to new possibilities you never would have discovered if everything had gone according to plan. But perhaps the most profound shift is in how you relate to yourself. You stop trying to be someone else and start being more fully who you already are. You recognize that your quirks and imperfections aren't bugs in the system, they're features. Part of the unique flavor you bring to the cosmic feast. This doesn't mean becoming complacent or stopping your growth. It means growing from acceptance rather than from self-rejection. Like a tree that doesn't struggle to become an oak when it's actually a pine, it grows magnificently into its own nature rather than exhausting itself trying to be something it's not. In relationships, this freedom manifests as the ability to love without possessing, to care without controlling, to be intimately involved without losing your center. You can be deeply affected by others without being destabilized by them. You can offer your gifts freely without being attached to how they're received. The ultimate freedom is the recognition that you don't need to be in control because you never were in control to begin with. This isn't a tragic realization, it's the most liberating discovery possible. It means you can finally stop carrying the impossible burden of managing existence and start enjoying the ride. And here's the beautiful secret. The moment you stop trying to control your life, life starts working better than you ever imagined possible. Not because you've found a new technique for getting what you want, but because you've discovered what you actually wanted all along, to be fully alive, fully present, fully engaged with the magnificent mystery of existence itself. So here we are, at the end of our journey together, yet somehow right back where we started. Because the truth is, you never needed to learn how to stop controlling. You already knew. You just needed permission to remember what you've always known deep down, that life knows what it's doing even when you don't. The invitation now is simple. Experiment with trusting this intelligence that beats your heart and grows your dreams. See what happens when you stop wrestling with existence and start dancing with it instead. You might just discover that the life you've been trying so hard to control has been trying to live you all along. And it knows exactly how to do that, beautifully, perfectly, effortlessly. All you have to do is let it.